On August 25, 2001, Aaliyah boarded a small plane in the Bahamas after finishing the shoot for Rock the Boat. She was only 22. Minutes later, the aircraft crashed shortly after takeoff, killing her and the 8 other people on board. That is the first reason her death still feels unreal. It did not arrive at the end of a long public collapse. It arrived in motion, in sunlight, in the middle of work, in the middle of youth. One moment she was filming on beaches and yachts, creating what would become her final music video. The next, the future was gone. There was no slow goodbye, no final tour, no public farewell. Just a violent interruption that turned a rising star into a permanent ghost almost instantly. What made the shock even more painful was where Aaliyah stood in her life at that exact moment. She was not fading, she was ascending. Her self-titled album had just been released weeks earlier. She had already crossed from music into film with Romeo Must Die, and she had finished work on Queen of the Damned. Everything around her suggested expansion. She did not carry the image of someone reaching the end. She carried the image of someone stepping into a bigger era, more confident, more refined, more untouchable. That is what makes the tragedy of Aaliyah so different from many other celebrity deaths. The world was not watching a downfall. The world was watching a woman becoming larger than ever, and then losing her in a single burst of fire and metal before that next chapter could even begin. And almost immediately, grief turned public. News spread across television, radio, newspapers, and city streets with the kind of disbelief that only follows a death that feels too cruel to fit reality. Fans were not just mourning a singer, they were mourning possibility. Aaliyah represented something rare: elegance without arrogance, beauty without noise, mystery without distance. She moved differently, sang differently, and carried herself with a calm that made her seem almost protected from chaos. That illusion shattered in an instant on that runway in the Bahamas. The question her death left behind was bigger than how she died. It was why a future that looked so bright could end so brutally, so suddenly, and so young. To understand why the loss of Aaliyah still hurts the world, we have to go back to the girl before the icon, before the videos, before the fame, before everyone started calling her baby girl. Before the world knew her as Aaliyah, before the sleek videos and the whisper-soft vocals turned her into a symbol of cool, she was a little girl born in Brooklyn on January 16, 1979, and later raised in Detroit. Music was not something distant in her life. It was already in the family, already in the room, already close enough to touch. From a young age, Aaliyah seemed unusually comfortable around performance, as if the stage did not frighten her the way it frightened other children. There was a quiet self-possession in her even then. She did not need to demand attention. She attracted it by simply being still. Family support helped open doors early, but that alone cannot explain why people remembered her. Plenty of children are introduced to music. Very few carry themselves with the kind of natural grace that makes adults stop and look twice. Even before fame, Aaliyah had that quality. She felt light without seeming weak, elegant without trying too hard, and mature in a way that did not feel rehearsed. It was as if she already understood that power did not always have to be loud. As she grew older, that difference became even clearer. Aaliyah was not the kind of future star who exploded with noise. She was subtler than that. She moved with restraint, spoke softly, and seemed to understand the value of leaving something unsaid. That would later become one of the most important parts of her appeal, but even as a teenager, it was already there. She did not project herself like someone chasing the spotlight. She seemed to let the spotlight come to her. In an industry that often rewards excess, Aaliyah was beginning to build her identity around control. Her beauty was undeniable, but it was the mystery around her that made it unforgettable. She could look youthful and wise at the same time, innocent and knowing at once. The camera loved her because she never seemed to force anything. She did not move like someone performing a role. She moved like water, smooth, precise, impossible to hold. That quality would eventually separate her from almost everyone else in her generation. Aaliyah was not just growing into talent, she was growing into presence. And that presence made her rise feel inevitable long before it actually happened. But hidden inside that early composure was the first shadow of the life she was entering. To grow up inside entertainment is to lose ordinary privacy very quickly. Aaliyah was still young, still forming, still becoming herself, and yet the machinery of image was already beginning to shape how the world would see her. That tension matters, because it would remain with her for the rest of her life. She would become famous for looking calm, polished, and in control, even when the pressures around her grew heavier. In that sense, the young Aaliyah already contained the woman she would become. Poised, magnetic, difficult to fully read, and somehow always slightly protected by her own stillness. Before she became the Princess of R&B, she was a girl carrying a rare kind of energy, one that did not beg to be seen, but made looking away almost impossible. And once the industry recognized that, her life would begin to move very fast. Aaliyah's rise did not feel explosive in the usual pop star sense. It felt smoother than that, almost inevitable, as if the culture slowly realized it was in the presence of someone operating on a different frequency. She first entered the public eye as a teenager with Age Ain't Nothing But a Number, and even then, there was something unusually controlled about her image and sound. She was young, but she did not present herself like a child trying to act older, nor like a performer begging to be noticed. She already seemed to understand minimalism, mystery, and restraint in a way most artists only learn much later. But it was with One in a Million that Aaliyah truly began to transform from promising young singer into an artist with a world of her own. The production felt futuristic, the rhythms were elastic and hypnotic, and Aaliyah floated through them with a softness that somehow made her even more powerful. She did not attack a song. She glided through it. That became part of her genius. While other singers overwhelmed with force, Aaliyah seduced with control. She made space feel musical. She made silence feel intentional. And as her sound evolved, so did her influence. She was no longer just a successful R&B singer. She was helping define what modern R&B could feel like. Cooler, sleeker, more intimate, and more visually aware. What made Aaliyah so compelling was that every part of her artistry seemed connected. The music, the fashion, the choreography, the camera presence. None of it felt separate. She turned understatement into identity. Her low, airy vocals could sound sensual, distant, tender, and commanding at the same time. Her style felt equally specific. Dark glasses, clean lines, baggy silhouettes mixed with softness, a kind of effortlessness that made imitation inevitable. Then there was the way she moved. Aaliyah never danced like she was trying to overpower the screen. She danced like she understood exactly how much energy to hold back. That restraint made her more magnetic, not less. By the late 1990s and early 2000s, she had become something rare, an artist whose coolness felt natural rather than manufactured. Songs like Are You That Somebody and Try Again pushed her even further into the center of the culture. Try Again, in particular, proved that she could dominate not just R&B but mainstream pop space too, while still sounding unmistakably like herself. Then came film. With Romeo Must Die, Aaliyah showed that her appeal was larger than music alone. She was not crossing over because the industry needed her to. She was crossing over because her presence could not stay contained in one lane. By the time audiences saw her on screen and heard her on soundtracks, it was clear she was becoming something bigger than a singer with hits. She was becoming a full-scale icon of her era. And yet the most haunting part of Aaliyah's rise is that in 2001, it still felt like the beginning. That is what makes her story so painful in retrospect. When her self-titled album Aaliyah arrived, she seemed more complete than ever, more mature, more self-assured, more comfortable inside her own mystique. The album did not sound like someone repeating past formulas, it sounded like someone entering her prime. Tracks like We Need a Resolution, More Than a Woman, and Rock the Boat carried a confidence that felt deeper than image. There was a womanhood in them, a calm command, a sense that Aaliyah was no longer just refining her style, but fully inhabiting it. She looked untouchable, not in a cold way but in the way certain stars seem to rise above the machinery around them and become timeless while still alive. That is why the tragedy cuts so deep. Aaliyah did not die after the legend was finished. She died while it was expanding. The world was not saying goodbye to a figure whose best days were behind her. It was looking at a woman whose future seemed to be opening wider than ever, in music, in film, in fashion, in influence. She was not fading into memory. She was stepping into permanence. And that is what gave her death its particular cruelty. It did not feel like the ending of a completed story. It felt like the violent removal of everything that story was about to become. What made Aaliyah different from so many stars of her era was not just her beauty or her talent. It was the sense of control she carried everywhere. She rarely seemed chaotic in public. She did not build her image around scandal, confession, or emotional explosion. Instead, she mastered a quieter kind of power, the power of composure. In photographs, interviews, performances, and public appearances, Aaliyah appeared calm, elegant, and almost impossibly self-contained. That image became part of her appeal. People were drawn to the mystery, to the feeling that she always held something back. But control has a price, especially for someone who enters the entertainment industry so young. The more the public admired her polish, the less room there seemed to be for mess, uncertainty, or visible weakness. Aaliyah was expected to remain graceful under pressure, beautiful under scrutiny, and smooth under the weight of constant attention. The world saw poise. It did not always see the labor required to maintain it. That is part of what makes her story so haunting. Unlike many celebrity tragedies, Aaliyah's did not unfold through a public spiral. There was no long tabloid collapse for people to point to afterward and say the ending was obvious. Her burden was quieter than that. She lived inside an industry that demanded perfection while rewarding mystery, and she managed both so well that it became easy to forget how young she still was. She was carrying a growing career in music, entering film, shaping fashion, and standing at the center of a culture that wanted more from her every year. To the public, that made her look untouchable. But sometimes the people who appear most in control are simply the best at protecting what they do not want the world to see. Aaliyah's silence became part of her identity, and silence can be beautiful. It can also be lonely. When a person becomes known for elegance, stillness, and restraint, the world often mistakes that for invulnerability. And invulnerability is one of the most dangerous illusions fame can create. By 2001, Aaliyah seemed to have achieved something rare. She had grown beyond hype and become a fully formed presence. She was no longer just a rising artist. She was a standard of taste, movement, style, and emotional cool. That was the gift of her image, but also its hidden tragedy. She looked so balanced that people could forget how much pressure a future like hers could place on a single human life. Music wanted more. Film wanted more. The public wanted more. And because Aaliyah carried expectations so beautifully, the demands around her only grew. That is why the loss hits with such unusual force. Her story does not feel like the collapse of someone clearly falling apart. It feels like the destruction of someone who looked as if she had everything under control. And maybe that is the cruelest part of all. Aaliyah made grace look effortless, and in doing so, she gave the world no visible warning for what was coming next.
In the final days of Aaliyah's life, nothing looked like an ending. It looked like momentum. In August 2001, she was in the Bahamas filming Rock the Boat, surrounded by water, light, movement, and the kind of beauty that now feels unbearably cruel in retrospect. She had just released her self-titled album. Her career in film was growing, and the version of Aaliyah the world was seeing seemed more complete than ever. Elegant, controlled, fully formed, and still expanding. That is what makes the last images so haunting. She does not look like someone leaving the world. She looks like someone stepping deeper into it. But on the evening of August 25th, after finishing the shoot earlier than expected, Aaliyah boarded a twin-engine Cessna 402B at Marsh Harbor in the Bahamas. Almost immediately after takeoff, the plane crashed, killing her and the 8 other people on board. She was 22. The violence of that interruption is what still shocks people today. Aaliyah did not vanish at the end of a visible decline. She was taken at the exact moment her future seemed to be widening. The grief that followed was immediate because the loss felt larger than a headline. News spread fast across television, radio, and newspapers, and what people mourned was not only the woman Aaliyah had been, but the life she had not yet lived. She had already shaped modern R&B with softness, precision, and restraint, but 2001 made it feel as though she was about to become something even bigger. A figure whose influence would move across music, film, fashion, and culture at once. Her death turned that sense of arrival into permanent incompletion. And that is why Aaliyah's story hurts in such a particular way. It is not simply tragic because she was young. It is tragic because she looked so fully alive, so in command of her image, so certain to grow into something even more iconic. The world did not lose a legend after the legend was finished. It lost a woman who was still becoming one. That difference matters. It is the line between sadness and haunting. Aaliyah's death did not close a story the public had already accepted as complete. It froze one at the most painful possible moment, right before the next chapter began. Her funeral in New York made that grief visible. Mourners lined the streets as her ornate silver casket was carried in a glass-walled, horse-drawn hearse to St. Ignatius Loyola Church, while fans stood behind barricades, crying, applauding, and calling her name. Inside, the service was private. Outside, the sorrow belonged to everyone. After the ceremony, 22 white doves were released into the sky, one for each year of her life. It remains one of the most unforgettable funeral images in modern celebrity history because it captured exactly what Aaliyah had come to represent: beauty, grace, youth, and something almost too delicate for the world that consumed her. But her legacy did not end in mourning. It moved forward through the music, the videos, the stillness in her voice, the cool intelligence of her image, and the generations of artists who borrowed from the future she helped invent. Aaliyah did not leave behind noise. She left behind atmosphere. A style of presence so refined that it still feels modern, still feels copied, still feels missed. She did not fade. She was taken. And that is why the silence after her still hurts.